And now, our feature contemplation.
Speaking of Cinema with Andrew Schwartz.
Welcome to the Speaking Cinema podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Schwartz, and I just wanted to thank everyone right off the bat for supporting the podcast after the inaugural first podcast with John Bewley on the movie Smile. And thank you so much for all of your feedback, your support, your goodwill. I really personally appreciate it so much. And today, we are going to Shangri-La with Saltburn from 2023. And we have a great guest today, guys. But before I introduce him, again, I would just encourage everyone that really enjoys or likes what they're listening to, or if you do want to support the podcast and you haven't yet, a simple review, a like on whatever channel that you're getting this podcast on right now. Comments really, really help support the podcast and keep us going. And I am trying to do as much as I possibly can in the background to make this show more and more engaging and better for you, the listeners. So again, we've got Saltburn today, and this film's been making quite a buzz. We have an awesome guest to talk about all of this. He's a writer and a director, and a true gentleman, if I may say so myself, Adam Seccafico. Adam, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Bubby, how you doing? It's been months. Are you eating well? You look thin. You need me to send you something? Well, when you send you a little something, Bubby? Huh? Oh, you look so skinny. You look so skinny since you've been out in L.A.
Well, I have to say that I've only done, this is what, 1 1/12 of an episode.
Yeah.
And that is probably the best response to thanks for coming on the podcast yet.
Let's have some fun, man.
Always. The competition is fierce, right? We got one other person, but
it's me
so
and
far.
John Bewley. I'm trying to beat John Bewley for most times invited back. So I think I'm off to a good start there.
Look out, John Bewley. No more smiling for you. So, Adam is just a wealth of knowledge and a very, very talented, fine filmmaker, and you guys are going to see that for yourselves. I don't even need to say it, but I'm just so happy to have him on. So, again, welcome to Speaking Cinema. We're going to get right into it, because I like to get right into it here. Saltburn. Let's do a logline read, Adam, and let's take a look at what we think of it. Because, hey, some are strong, some are weak, and you just never know what a logline is going to say. A student at Oxford University finds himself drawn into the world of a charming and aristocratic classmate who invites him to his eccentric family's sprawling estate for a summer never to be forgotten. Oh, it almost sounds like a Lifetime movie. But what do you think about that, Adam?
I mean, and we'll talk about this with the title as well when we get into that, but for me, good marketing when it comes down to movies is about asking questions or getting the audience to ask themselves questions. So with that logline, and I'm going to ask your opinion of this too, do you think that you're asking yourself questions like, all right, student at Oxford, drawn to a charming classmate, mysterious house, like, do you find yourself asking questions like, I need to know what this is, as opposed to just having it pretty much spell the entire plot out for you, which I'm glad the logline doesn't in this case. That's like the first third of the movie right there, I would say, roughly.
Glad it does, as in spell out the plot or make you ask questions?
I'm glad it makes me ask questions, and I'm glad it doesn't spell out the entire plot.
Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of thing where, see, the promotional aspect of the logline is tricky in and of itself, right? To sell any film. But this film, you're right, it has to ride that line between being a good hook, because that's what the thing is supposed to be, right? It needs to get you to ask those questions, want to watch it to answer the questions, but it can't give too much away. And if you give too much away about this movie, it really kind of smolders all of the fun that you could have with it.
It needs to lure you in. You need to be asking, like, because again, I had no idea. I just knew what the title was. Like, I watched the trailer, and I can talk about the trailer for a second, and I really enjoyed the trailer because, again, it had me asking questions. I wasn't sitting there going, Yeah, sure, was there one shot I wish I didn't give away in the trailer? Yeah, but didn't give the entire movie away.
Right.
But had me go, all right, this looks like it's going to be at the very least a fun watch. At the very
Yes.
least. But I don't know, because I feel like that's a big thing with promotional material when it is actually being paid attention to these days.
Right.
I feel like they everything's spelled out. Hey guys, you're going to go in, you know exactly what you're going to get. You know exactly what you ordered. And this log line again,
Yeah.
it takes it right up to a point where, to your point, this could be a Lifetime movie for all I know. It's not. It's far, far from a Lifetime movie, but it gives you just enough to go, okay, Oxford, so it's going to be, it's an English film, kind of a class warfare kind of thing is what I'm thinking about. And an eccentric, weird family that, apparently will never be forgotten. I'm allured. I'm hooked. I want to know more because I know that that's not the entire story.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm hooked too. I'm not hooked as strongly as I think now, having seen the film a couple times. I don't think I'm hooked as much as I could be. But again, I don't want to start preaching about how the best way to promote the film is, right, with the logline, because I don't know sometimes what that median is.
Correct.
That line that you have to walk. But just knowing that the film is not just this sort of drama that I think that the logline lays out, I think it's good sometimes to hide genre points, right, subgenres of a film, right, because that's just a really nice jack-in-the-box kind of a trick, right?
And boy, do I have thoughts about that later.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, pretty much a jack-in-the-box. But this is... Yeah, it doesn't quite give me the full depth of the movie in such a way where I think if I saw something that alluded toward it being a little bit more funny, or alluded toward it being perhaps a thriller, maybe even with a question mark, is it a thriller or not? This this to me could describe a period piece.
Oh yeah,
right?
it can describe
Minus
anything. It's very
right,
it's
right.
again, it's very, you have to ask you questions. Let me ask you this. If this was a film that, and obviously it did play in theaters briefly, but, this was released on the streaming platform of Amazon.
Right.
Let's say, you're walking by the poster. Let's say you look up IMDb on your phone after you walk by the poster. Would this logline make you want to see this in the theater?
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's the ultimate question. Me personally, I'll watch pretty much anything.
Oh, yeah,
but,
same here.
However, not to split hairs, but if this was a logline that was given to me side by side with other loglines for films that were out at the same time, and we were trying to decide on one to see that evening, and not three, because we're crazy, theater hoppers. We'll do that all the time, and we've done it together. But if I had to choose one, I probably wouldn't choose this one. It's just not, it doesn't have that gravitas for me. Like, oh, there's something really off kilter and interesting that I want to discover about this. Right. It says eccentric family. That's nice. Yeah. It's eccentric. That's something a little bit different. But the rest of it, I think, could be read as, or it might objectively be, quite dry. So it's interesting they chose this verbiage here.
Like, let me ask you this. If they described Oliver, the main character of the film, a little bit more in this as just an Oxford student, because he's a strange fellow to begin with, on top of that.
Right.
So if they did, let's say, a little bit more to describe him, the log line, if they described him as an eccentric Oxford student, would you think that would help a little bit more if they kind of like peppered in some more about the protagonist of the film and the center of the film into the log line?
I do think that would help a lot, because I don't know if this is incidental, but and I hope this isn't one of your film references that I'm already dropping at the beginning of the podcast, but Rushmore is a film that I really enjoy.
Oh, I love that movie too.
Yeah, Wes Anderson's Rushmore. And for some reason, I didn't think of this before, but as we're talking about this now, if we said, oh, this eccentric private school student that is on campus, does all these things, meets with people, but he is his own person. I don't think that would work. I don't think it would work against it because I personally love Rushmore. But likening it to a character in a movie that's very sort of iconic of that indie, free-spirited, let's talk about the wealthy in this kind of a setting world, I make that association and I say, hey, this is a movie that I want to see because that kind of a thing hasn't popped up in a very successful way for me in a long time. And Rushmore was, I mean, we're going back to like '02 or '01 or something.
98.
Yeah, '98.
98.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Wow, it's even longer than I thought. So that is definitely something that would help. What about for you? Do you think that it would be even stronger or work against it if they outline Oliver a little bit more?
I think because he's the main focus of the film, to kind of describe him as blandly as that is kind of does a disservice to the character, I feel like. Because while I'm asking questions about the family, about the estate, and about, Summer That'll Never Be Forgotten, I'm not asking questions about Oliver. I'm not asking questions about the Oxford student. And as a result of that fact, it would benefit more if, let's say, they did kind of sprinkle that a little bit more into the logline. Not much, not enough to spell it out for the audience, but if they maybe use the phrase eccentric that they use for the family, instead use it to describe the Oxford student.
Yes, because an Oxford student, and we're going to talk a lot about the character Oliver, right? He is the center, he is the sun in this movie around which everything revolves, right? So I do think that that would do well for the film because he is such a focus and such a kind of head scratching character. But again, yeah, they didn't want to give away their hand, maybe, right? But at the same time, I just feel like there needs to be something a little bit more to give us an idea of what our protagonist is going to do for us, even as an audience that's fringe outside of the movie, hasn't seen the movie yet. What is he going to do for us, as opposed to some period piece with a student in it, right? Or some regular, drama that's not off the wall with a student in it. So I do think that would have served the film well.
Correct.
So, title take with
Title
Adam
take.
Seccafico. So the title is Saltburn, another one-word title.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you first, Adam. What do you think about this title? Does it, quote unquote, encapsulate the film? I'm going to also kind of put a little tiny parenthetical here. What did you think of Saltburn before you saw the movie? And what did you think after you saw the movie of this title?
The title is also a driver to sell the film, just like the logline, just as much as the tagline. The title is something to use to sell the film. I had no idea what the fuck Saltburn was. I had no idea. Was somebody gonna get tortured with salt and that's what it's a reference to? I literally had no earthly idea. So when I walked in and realized, oh, it's the name of the estate, Saltburn. All right, well, it got me asking questions because I had no idea what it was beforehand. And afterwards, I mean, yeah, it fits. I mean, all the primary action takes place at Saltburn as far as the estate's concerned. And it's kind of, ultimately, it turns out the acquisition of Saltburn turns out to be what the main character with Oliver wants at the end of it. Because of what represents status, because like those people are like,
so it's
practically a castle. Let's be honest.
Saltburn itself is
if you could. A castle with many things in it. I don't know if you clocked this, but there was a scene where Rosamund Pike is sitting by the pool with the kids, and she's kind of waxing about her younger days and about how when she was younger she used to hang out with all the famous Britpop bands, Oasis, Blur, Pulp. And my ears perked up because I love me some Oasis. And I'm like, oh, an Oasis reference. Lovely, love it. And she talks about a song called Common People and how the whoever wrote the song for the band Pulp was like, oh, he said he wrote that about me. And that's not true at all. And I actually went out and I listened to the song, Common People. Pretty solid song. Not my favorite Britpop song, but I think it ties well into the film because Common People is kind of how the family wants to live. And it's how Oliver kind of sees himself. So, like I said, do I think I can think of a better title than Saltburn? I don't know. Maybe not if I think about it hard. But the alt would probably be Common People. That would be my alt. But Saltburn is a fairly decent title in of itself because it is where the action takes place in the film.
I think it's pretty cool It is a risk. It always has been, but I think especially these days where we're so saturated with content,
Hmm.
I think it's quite a risk to call a film, especially one word that no one knows. Well, we'll get into this a little bit later because Saltburn is a town in the UK, and that's part of the reason why our director chose it. But when most people in the world don't know what this word is or what it means, on one hand you could say, hey, it makes people ask questions, and how will I answer the question? By watching the movie. Lovely, right? But I think that sort of worked a little bit more in days of past. Now people are just like, Saltburn, I don't know what the hell that is, right? Unless it sort of goes viral or something like this movie kind of did. So
It
it is
did.
a little risky, right? Is the point. I'm not saying
Mhm.
never do it. But at the same time, I've seen so many, especially short films, that have some sort of word or reference in the title that no one understands. And I think that just the regular movie-going population generally trends these days toward not giving a crap what that is.
Yeah, and look, and as somebody who like I've never been great naming titles for movies. Like I always found my titles very like spell out everything. I have a movie called The Killer Across the Street. What's about? It's about a potential killer living across the street. See, I spelled that right there in the title. So there's no real questions needed. It's like you know what you're going to get. So
Yeah.
I do appreciate, again, a title that's does tie in with the film, but does ask the questions. And look, I can appreciate risks. I think more risks need to be taken. I think everybody feels that way in general. But
Hmm.
by that same token, it's a risk, but it's not really a major risk,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Like, because it's still a provocative title. Like I said, it's still something that like makes you go, "What is that?" And already with all the buzz the movie had, so like again, I'm literally thinking to myself like, is something going to happen involving salt that is going to like cause me to wince in my seat?
Yeah. Me too. I was like, are people eating escargot? What is happening here? But I guess I'll just say it right now real quick, Adam, because I want to say it so badly. I can't not say it. Our amazing director here, Emerald, I hope I'm saying it right, Fennell.
I was worried about that too when I'm reading it,
Yeah.
going because she really
Yeah.
is. I've really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah. Me too.
I haven't seen Promising Young Woman yet because 2020 was kind of a vast void of
Me neither.
nothingness.
Yeah, we both haven't.
And I'm look after watching Saltburn, I am more than happy to go back and watch Promising Young Woman because I really enjoyed this a lot, enough to go back and watch her previous work.
Me too, for sure. And enough people already had recommended Promising Young Woman to me when it came out. So now it's absolutely a no-brainer. I should have seen it by now anyway. But
Yes.
Emerald Fennell had said about Saltburn, apparently, that it sounded like a sex injury.
Oh
But
yeah.
it sounded like a sex injury, she said, but a really nice one. Like a sort of sting, a pleasurable sting. Oh man. I mean, now I really want to meet her. It's like, you and I could have a good conversation about calling movies torturous things, but it's just I love that. It's so interesting. I would like to pick her brain a little bit more about that. But she also said a reason for the naming here. Just to be clear, the estate does exist. It's a real estate. It's a real house. I'm not going to say the name of the estate because I've already been reading that the owners of the estate that graciously let Emerald shoot there is now being absolutely hounded and pestered by tons of fans from all over the world that keep.
That warms my heart because it shows that people
Yeah,
saw the movie.
it
So
warms my heart too.
it
It's
warms my heart. So
really
yeah,
great, but it's not great for the owners of the blank estate. So I want to be respectful there. But it is real. But it's not the name of the estate. She changed the name to Saltburn. However, in an interview, she also said Saltburn is the name of a real England town. So when she heard it, it sounded like she had never heard the word, I believe, before. She had just learned it was a town, and she thought it sounded like a sex injury. And man, she made a movie about it. So, inspiration can come from anywhere, I suppose.
Oh yeah,
But at the same time, uh, according to some trivia that I read, she did at a very young age tell her parents, hey, you know what? I want to make movies about murder and live in the United States, not here. So, in a way, that little girl is the same exact person, and
I
she
had the
stayed true
inverse.
to her word. Yeah.
I had the inverse of that conversation with my parents. I'm like, I want to make movies about murder, and I want to live in England. So I had the
another
inverse of that.
another reason why you have to meet her. You
Oh
could
yeah.
just tag team, high five each other as you're passing in the night on the sea across the pond. I feel similarly. I think it's a really cool title. We've never heard this word before. Now everyone's talking about it. It's becoming mimetic. It became viral, especially on Amazon. Way to go, Amazon, for backing a film like this. It's a little transgressive, right? It's very alternative.
Right.
And the
And
title
and
underscores that.
and before we get into the first image, because this
Sure.
is the actual literal first image,
Mhm.
how wonderful is it to see Leo the Lion again before a movie? How
It's
just
great.
wonderful! Like, didn't it like just your heart flutter? Like,
Yeah.
thank God, finally, finally.
Yes. Yes. I needed that. And especially because I think at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, they used to have a live lion in there.
They
And I
did.
remember as a kid, yeah, in this big cage, a clear cage, and you were able to see it and feel the just kind of fear when you're right next to it. You feel like you're going to get your face ripped off. I mean, those were the good old days. But now, I believe they the lion, I guess, passed away by now. It was a long time ago. But now I don't think that they keep a lion in there anymore. Damn liability insurance. I don't know, whatever it was, but
So it disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
it disappeared under mysterious
They they
circumstances.
buried it out in the desert.
Yeah, maybe with the aliens. Uh, what's the connection? You decide. So yeah, let's go into. We already talked a little bit about the characters, right? I mean, the main character. It's pretty simple. We've got Oliver, who is this very young adult, but still very young. Undergrad, college age. We don't know how old he is. He's somewhere between 18 and 21 or 22, something like that. And he is just the student that appears at Oxford. And we've got a couple other important characters as well. We have Felix, who we're going to talk about a lot, who is sort of I guess you could say he starts out as a love interest, but even that is, everything is sort of, can cause like a contentious debate here.
Platonic ideal. That's my takeaway.
A,
Felix
plat-
was
a platonic ideal. I
yeah.
love
That
that.
was Oliver's platonic ideal was Felix. It was almost like he wanted to become him to a large respect.
Yes, a
So
platonic
that's how I. Yeah.
ideal. I wish I had a version of Adam in my pocket so I could just translate all of my thoughts into clear, articulate ideas whenever I need him. And then Felix's family, who we'll introduce as well, who are referenced in the logline. So let's get right to this opening image, Adam. And man, what an opening image it is! I'm so happy because we've only done 2 movies so far, and both of them have had phenomenal, in my opinion, opening images with so much to talk about. I mean, I can almost imagine, because Emerald Fennell is also the writer of this piece. I can almost imagine these people writing these things, right? And they have that opening image in their head, and it has so much meaning, and there's so much intention built into these opening images, right? Like the curtains opening to these wonderful, ballets that we're going to see or something. And they work so hard on these images and these sequences, exposing things and giving us a feeling of things. And no one talks about it very much. So I just really want to do right by just how creative and interesting and informative this opening image is. So let me go just very quickly into what happens here. And then I want to hand it right to you, Adam, to get your thoughts. So first, we have this extreme close-up of this school seal, okay? And it's a cigarette box. And from that point on, we get these quick, almost jarring, choppy close-ups, revealing all different sorts of things. Oliver starts a voiceover, right? Narration. I wasn't in love with him, and so on. Um, and we get this unbelievable montage of and beautiful operatic choral and orchestral music, and they're introducing so many different things to us at this assault rifle pace, right? I mean, this almost seems like a sizzle reel or a trailer in and of itself for the movie. We mentioned trailers before. Very interesting, giving us all different sorts of tones, different shot scales, different lit shots. And that is just incredible. And it gives way to this kind of dance party where we see Oliver for the first time in these kind of black lights. It was impossible not to love Felix, and so on. We introduce Felix. Then we, of course, introduce Oliver. And then it's almost like a dream with this montage. We're showing these characters. It feels like it's almost not reality. It's very otherworldly and ethereal. And she just gives us so many images, so much music. She dials that music up. And we see so many contrasting things. She just weaves this very wild web together for us. And then, of course, we enter this courtyard with Oliver, where we introduce him from behind, and then we follow him into this inner courtyard, and that's where this entire opening sequence ends with a title. Whew! That took a lot to say. So, Adam, what are your first... I don't even know where to begin, but what are your thoughts? Let's go in chronological order here.
So when Oliver says, and this is obviously revealed later in the film, when he says he didn't love Felix, not that way, to quote the great Mel Brooks, bullshit. This scene, firstly, I'll start with this because I'll talk about the character stuff first. It establishes that Oliver is an unreliable narrator, first and foremost, that he, and we're going to find out throughout the film that he is a pathological liar back and forth. And it wasn't until the second time I didn't watch the full film back, but I did watch a few key scenes. And obviously this is one of them because I knew we were going to talk about the opening image. But this first scene establishes Oliver as as an unreliable narrator. He's going off on, of course I didn't, but I did love Felix, but he had a problem with those women, and oh my God, but I was there to protect him. No, you weren't. You were fawning over him the entire film. And again, you practically want to be him, it turned out. So I enjoyed it in that sense because, yeah, it established, who this character was right off the bat. Even if you have to find out later on, he's an unreliable narrator. Now, I have a thing about nonlinear storytelling that I'm kind of tired of it to a degree because I feel like it's overused. Mainly because people don't know how to usually apply it. Because nonlinear storytelling is a very novelistic way of writing. It's not a very cinematic way of writing. Cinematic writing is usually very, point A, point B, point C. And if you keep jumping around without context, your head starts to melt. Now, what Fennell does for Saltburn and why I do enjoy it, she doesn't overuse this scene much. I think she only does it 2 more times apart from the opening. 1 more time at either the midpoint or beginning of Act 2. And then obviously at the end with the big reveal of who he was talking to the entire time. So I enjoy that she used it almost as this scene almost as act breaks to a degree. And also it's interesting to technically start the film at the ending and then and now you see where it began. So it's not nonlinear in a sense of like, and then we're going to jump back from here, then to here, then to there. It's the story itself is very much linear. She just kind of using the ending first as kind of a hook. So I can appreciate that a little bit more than just if she, kept jumping around every so often structurally.
Yeah.
Plus, literally the movie opens to a circle montage. Nice little 3 shot of a guy lighting a cigarette. Which who doesn't love that?
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many implications there, honestly, right? I mean, we could go all day.
Oh yeah.
About this cigarette in this movie. There's a lot of things that I think characters would need a cigarette.
Oh yeah, and let me ask you this. This movie is because said it was a period piece. Technically, this movie is a period piece. It takes
Yeah.
place in 2002, which,
Yeah.
how does that make you
Almost.
feel?
Yeah. Oh 06.
Oh, so, it was a class of
Yeah.
'06, but it was the insinuation I thought that they were freshmen coming in. So it would be '02, and then they would be graduating in '06.
Oh,
So
interesting.
how
Yeah,
does
I
it make you?
suppose so. You think they were freshmen?
Yes. So how does it make
Yeah.
you feel that the early aughts are now so old to be considered period?
Oh, maybe if I had an emotional breakdown podcast, we would talk about how I feel about it.
Let it out. Just let
No,
it out, pal.
no,
Just
yeah,
let
it's
it out right
crazy.
here on the air. Just let it out. It's okay. I'm here for you, buddy. I'm here for you.
Thank goodness. Um, yeah, it's quite a thing, and time goes by really fast, folks. I don't know if anyone's noticed that, except for me in the universe, but does go by fast. But that is actually a very essential part of what I think that my take on this movie, which we'll get into. Um, Interesting things you're saying here. I think I'm a little tired of nonlinear storytelling as well. I think that filmmakers like, or filmmaker like, because he was kind of the one that really introduced it back into the fore. Tarantino, who you're a huge fan of, that stuff is phenomenal.
It's funny. I just got a comic book. Somebody like basically took an interview with Tarantino and published it as a comic, and that got brought
Hmm.
up. And he's actually fought back on it. He said, "Look, most of my films, if you want to think about, are linearly told stories. Just Pulp Fiction was one that popularized it." And then he also corrected. It's like, but here's the thing: it wasn't that I invented nonlinear storytelling in film. I read, and also people weren't doing that at the time. He said,
Right.
"You want to know a famous example and where I don't think he got it from it, but he brought it up. He said a movie that starts at the end, Citizen Kane, 1941, well before Pulp Fiction came out. So
Yeah.
it's been there. It hasn't been deployed as much, but I think post Pulp Fiction, and again, it's there's no such thing as bad structure or bad formatting in terms of theory. It's
Hmm.
all about execution. There's bad execution of it, and there's been
Right.
plenty of bad execution when it pertained to nonlinear storytelling post Pulp Fiction. I think Fennell found a way to make it feel not fresh per se, but she didn't overuse the nonlinearness of it. She used it again, the same scene a couple times, mostly to serve as transition between acts. And I think that's why it
Yes.
didn't bother me as much as it would another film that maybe deployed nonlinear storytelling poorly.
I think it's very important to note here that this movie starts with an overture, in my opinion, right? Overtures, and just to work in, I think, Emerald's favor here, to really justify what I loved about, to be clear, what I loved about this specific use of all this nonlinear stuff and this fast cutting and this rhythm and this jarring opening. It makes sense in the context of what an overture is. Okay, now let's just talk about music for a second. I'm a huge music nerd, so this is really the first thing I'm thinking of, right? Now, overtures, we could get into it. I mean, overture doesn't necessarily mean this, right? An overture can be a kind of independent standalone piece, but let's talk about an overture as I think it's being employed here. An overture, uh, probably around the 17th century or so on, in many operas, were written by different composers, and it became a sort of it became a style, it became a fad in opera, to utilize a piece at the beginning of an opera, while people were sometimes, even if it's early enough, maybe 16th century, people were still sitting in their seats and getting comfortable, and the orchestra would play an overture. However, I think how most people know it today, and how I think I would argue that Emerald is utilizing it here, is from about the 17th century on. These overtures were used as pieces that sort of delineated different themes and melodies, motifs throughout the opera at the beginning. So everyone is seated, right? The lights go down, and then the orchestra plays the first official piece of the entire story before the curtains even open sometimes, which is this overture. Okay, and like I said, it's kind of spelling out the tone, it's spelling out themes musically. It's giving us a sense of the style of the composer, or of the time, the style of the music. So I believe that this is why we hear what sounds like an actual operatic overture, although most opera overtures don't have gigantic choruses singing during it. Maybe like the last movement of a symphony or something. However, I think that she was going for the drama here of giving us this sort of overall curtains are about to open overture, which number one just gives it a stylistic it gives it stylistic points. But number two, I think it feeds into this whole idea that she's trying to give us, that this whole damn thing, Adam, I don't know if you agree, is a show. Oh my God. All the world is a stage here, right?
I mean, what think about like what's probably the most important, prop of the film. It's that little players box, the Canton players, as it were, that shows up at various points during the film. And what's Oliver's whole kind of facade? What's he doing? He's putting on a show for Felix and for his family.
Right.
The entire time. It's
right.
So yeah, I can totally see a read on that being the case.
Yeah. And I think it gives us a bit of an idea, a bit of a glimpse into the consciousness of Oliver, how he sees the world, right? He sees these people as characters in a sort of story that he wants to write himself. So he's sort of in the story that someone else wrote in a sort of meta way. He's also an absolute control freak, so he wants to become the writer of this story, and he wants to emerge the hero. He wants to have that sort of clout by the end of the story. He wants to conquer the other players in a sort of operatic, dramatic fashion. And I think that this is a brilliant way of telling us right off of the bat that this is what this movie is going to be. You are watching an opera. It's a show. These people are not real in a sense. I would also argue some things are metaphorical. Just like people on the opera stage are not real. Sometimes how on the operas are quite bizarre as well. If you're an opera fan, the story of operas are often just very bizarre and outlandish and weird and dramatic and symbolic of other sorts of things that happen in real life, but they're sort of augmentations and mutations of life, in some sense. Some are very realistic, but everything's so dramatic and outlandish. And I do think that is carried through in the same style by Emerald. She knows what she's doing here. She's telling you what she's doing right off the bat, and then she catapults you right into the story. Adam, love that. I think that that's an amazing choice.
I'll do you one further. And we might be getting a little bit deeper into the weeds here and kind of jumping all over the place as far as, you see the film as an opera. I will do you one better. I think this is very much a genre movie outside of genre, in the sense that, like, are there any, like, actual supernatural elements or horror elements outright? No. However, I 100% think that Oliver is a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Not a literal vampire in the sense that, even though he literally does drink blood at one point in the film, just not the way you would think. But he's a social vampire. He's literally leeching on to this family and sucking them dry emotionally in a lot of respects. Mm-hmm. There's times where you think about the infamous bathtub scene right now. He's literally sucking out a certain thing of Felix's out of the drain.
Right.
And he's inhabiting it. Then there's the scene later with Felix's sister Venetia where she's menstruating and he, for lack of a better term, eats her out anyway. And then that leads to my favorite shot of the film, which is literally after he's done eating her, he ducks down under the tub and you still see the blood on his lips. And that's when I started making that kind of connection of Felix kind of being a vampire in a literal sense. Now, there's one exception to this where he's not, imbibing something, but he's letting something out. And that's the scene after Felix passes. And it also goes into my whole unreliable narrator, from the beginning, where he's saying that he didn't love Felix, not in that way at least. And yet, what's arguably the most transgressive moment in this film is when Oliver literally has sex with Felix's grave. He's letting something out of his body there. And I think that's the last true piece of his transformation is before he literally tears his family apart. Not that he's already kind of started, but before he does, he needs to let something out to become almost like fully sociopathic in that sense and continue just to consume. So when he's literally fornicating the grave, that's the last kind of trickle of humanity he had kind of coming out, and then he is fully formed as a vampire after that fact.
Yeah.
That was my read, at least.
Yeah, that is a fascinating take on the movie. And I have to admit that I didn't really think of that. But I think that's absolutely totally valid. I think that's a great take. This is why I have you on here. I mean, really.
But that's the thing about, like, and the reason why, because there was some debate as to what film I was going to jump on with, and John Bewley did recommend Saltburn because of the transgressive nature of the film. Now, to the listeners at home that don't know about Andrew and I's relationship, the reason ultimately I wanted to do Saltburn was Andrew was very famous when he was living in New Jersey for throwing movie parties in which he would show some, for lack of a better term, more challenging films. Occasionally there'd be one or two that would be a bit more above above level. And then there'd be other times where it'd be stuff like Goodbye 20th Century is one that jumps out.
The movie where Santa Claus destroys the world.
Yeah, or Martyrs, which is the last film that I watched in his home before he moved to LA. And I thought to myself, like, maybe that's a connection right there where here's a film that's getting some buzz for being, transgressive, or at least as transgressive as a movie put out by Amazon can be. So maybe that's the connection right there where we can talk about the time that you showed Das Experiment in your house. And you looked over at me and I was about ready to fall asleep. And you said, Adam, what's wrong? You didn't like the movie? I'm like, no, Andrew, I liked the movie fine, but that was it. He's like, yeah, well, it was a moving, wonderful drama. And I'm like, Andrew, you're my dealer. I come to you to get fucked up. What you gave me was some very nice weed, and I wanted crack. And I did not get crack that night.
Yeah, except the only thing is we were watching that movie with tons of people that wanted no more than weed. So, one has to read the room and understand what kind of drugs everyone wants. But just to be clear, I'm not a real drug dealer. But yeah, Adam and I love transgressive movies. But what's neat about that is I love transgressive movies, people, because it shows it's so brave and it's so honest, and it tells us about the world in a way that we don't like to usually talk about, and that's always very interesting to me. But I'm very tough on transgressive movies. I love watching them, but it's not like I just like to sit and rub cocoa butter on myself and watch all this stuff. No, it's not like that. It's what I'm doing here is I'm seeing how a really good artist can somehow create something that's very difficult and challenging in traditional ways, and challenge the status quo, challenge the viewer, and come out the other side being able to say, this is why it was essential for me to do that. Right? This is why the movie has that much more meaning. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm broadcasting to you right now, with scenes like this, with a tone that's like this, with images like that, and sounds like that. Right? So I love transgressive movies, but I only like good transgressive movies that do it for a reason. It's weird? You and I, Adam, I think we had a similar reaction to this movie where, no, I know we did because we talked about this. People flipped out when they saw this, right? It went viral to mainstream audiences, so to speak. They see it from, all over the world and all different corners, easily on their tablets and phones on Amazon and their smart TVs. And people flipped about this movie. And of course, they all call me because I'm the guy that likes to show transgressive movies. And, like Adam said, and they say, hey, you got to see this thing. It was insane. I mean, all this stuff happened and it was gross and it was over the top and it's weird. And I watched it and I said, I really don't understand why everyone's flipping out. Even correcting for the fact that I love movies that are like this on a general basis. But you thought that too, Adam, right? You were a little bit underwhelmed in the transgressive department here.
I'll say this though, but like I'm jaded in that sense where,
Mm-hmm.
and again, you and I are like the filmic equivalent of the ghost pepper people who are like, oh yeah, ghost pepper, and be like, not nearly spicy enough. Meanwhile, you show it to somebody else and they'll go, oh my God, my mouth is on what? Because I've eaten so many spicy foods that my taste buds are just numb to it at this point. Like,
Right.
I'll tell you this. I watched Pink Flamingos last night for fun. I watched Pink Flamingos to enjoy myself. How many people would often say that? Yeah, and by the way, to your point about transgressiveness, there's a reason why Female Trouble is more beloved or more respected than Pink Flamingos, because there was a bigger point to Female Trouble. Shout out again to John Bewley.
Yes,
But,
and shout out to the Academy Museum in Los Angeles, which has an incredible John Waters, the Pope of Trash exhibit. It takes up the entire fourth floor of the whole museum. Please go see it before August when it closes. That is all.
But yeah, to your point, like, you and I are not going to find much in terms of the transgression here, because I think you and I both seen worse than this. And not to say that the movie isn't transgressive in its imagery. It is. Mm-hmm. But, and I'm going to sound like a film school douchebag, so please bear with me.
Bring it on.
People who are normal folk tend to love Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks at the end of the day was a network show. People hated Firewalk with me when it came out because it was a David Lynch film. And I've often said, like, Twin Peaks felt like your mother getting a tattoo and being like, ooh, I'm a sexy, badass biker chick. Now, Firewalk with me is her walking into a biker bar going, oh, no, I don't want this. So, yeah, like, you and I seek this stuff out. So, Oliver drinking cum out of a bathtub, show me something I haven't seen a million times. Why don't you? We're those sick fucks.
It's just another morning for Adam Seccafico.
Exactly. That's my 9 a.m. breakfast.
Yep, I hear you, buddy. So, but the thing is with this film, and I just not to dote on this too much, but the transgressive, quote unquote, in this film, I really do think it is there for a reason. It was striking. It wasn't exploitative. The screen time of images that were like this seemed very deliberate, and even very restrictive. There wasn't much that I saw in terms of those scenes. We'll talk about scenes in a second, but in terms of those scenes that made me think, this is very distasteful. You have to cut some of this stuff, right? Because I hope I still do have taste. I don't want everyone out there to think that I don't have taste and I just enjoy watching, blood and gore and everything. But it needs to be tasteful, and it needs to align with, I think, the goals of the filmmaker. It needs to align with the tone of the film. And in the same way that spices and herbs in your cooking dish, they need to complement the dish. Right? They can't overpower the dish. Otherwise, why don't you just eat spices and herbs with a spoon from a bowl? Right? That's not what we're looking at here. We want all of the ingredients, all of the dials and the switches being turned and switched in such a way where they're all working kind of symphonically with each other to create this layered, textured piece that we can get something out of. Like eating a meal that gives us all these different layers of flavors, and it kind of changes the way that we think about something. So what I'd like to do is I just want to finish this opening image, because Adam just gave us his fantastic take on the film. I want to give you, I'm not married to this take, but I can't help but think this. And she gives you right in the opening sequence, at the end of the opening sequence, what this is. Okay? So let me go on my little spiel here. When the camera is following Oliver from behind, right? First of all, I just love how we're slowly tracking with him. We don't see him right away. It's almost like he's masked, but we can't see it, right? And he's looking around left to right. He's not looking forward. He's looking down at a map. Again, I love how Emerald gives us right away that this guy is just a phony. He's a fake. We don't even know if he goes to this school at all. We don't even know if he's of age to go to the school, right? I mean, there's so much pretending and imposter syndrome going on here. But at the end of this sequence, if you notice, at the end of this shot, he enters this inner courtyard. Farley makes fun of him for the clothes that he's wearing, right? Yet another indication that he's completely overcompensating, and this nincompoop is just trying to be something that he isn't. Okay, that's a very sterile way to put it.
Yeah.
And then the camera goes, it turns around to finally see his face after Farley makes fun of him. He tries to shake it off. We see his face for the first time, no mask, at least a literal one, and when we see him, behind him is class of 2006. And like you said, Adam, this must be 2002, right?
Right, because it felt like, he was coming in for the first time. You know, that's at least how I saw it. Like, this is kind of everybody's kind of introductory. Because even like you look like like all the characters in general. Like, Felix doesn't feel, for somebody of that level of affluence, like he's been quite jaded yet or quite removed from society as affluent people tend to be. So there's still kind of a youthful exuberance about him. Same with Felix, is kind of shy and timid to himself, doesn't have many people to kind of go with, because while sure he's socially inept, you learn about him that he's not incompetent and he can kind of maneuver things his way. Like, he would be able to find friends relatively quickly, not just that one creepy guy that kind of latches onto Oliver, rather, when we first see him kind of try to interact with people.
Right.
So that's my takeaway, is like, it feels like they're freshmen because the characters still feel very young in a lot of respects. Whereas by your senior year, like, yeah, sure, look, you're still in your early 20s, you're not fully matured yet.
Right.
But you're a little bit more worn down, I think, by your senior year than you are your freshman year.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not even so sure that Felix is intended to be a freshman, right? He could just be. I mean, he's seemingly superior in every possible way, right? Especially from the perspective of Oliver. So he might as well be an upperclassman of some kind, right? He has achieved, even just by his existence there for a couple of years, being that kind of socialite, he's achieved what Oliver wants to achieve in every respect. But I just to finish what I was saying before, she reveals to us this is the class of 2002, right? These kids are going to graduate, or at least Oliver will graduate, if he's even really a student there, in 2006. Get this. MySpace. MySpace.com. I think some of us might remember that. MySpace was launched in 2003. Okay? And it was sold for $580 million in 2005. Facebook starts in 2004 at Harvard. Not too different of a prestigious school in Oxford. Okay? Kind of in the same category, right? Perhaps even the Oxford of America. Who knows? And then, of course, it opened to the public Facebook in September of 2006. Anyone who is 13 or older with an email address could use it. Then, Twitter launches the same year, which people forget, the same year as Facebook became public, 2006. WhatsApp follows, 2009. Formspring, Omegle, all 2009, right? And that, of course, leads to Instagram, 2010. Facebook Messenger, 2011. Snapchat, WeChat, 2011 as well. TikTok, OnlyFans, 2016. And these are the ones people are still using now. The youngins, one would say. Adam, I think I'm prepared to say that this movie seems to me to be, because you have to ask yourself, why this time? Right? It is a period piece, like you said. This is a period. And again, I'm not going to comment on our ages now. This is a period in time. And not only is it a period of time, it's a period of time that preceded another period of time today, right? So I get the feeling that maybe Emerald was writing this story as a sort of kind of wicked nostalgia about what young people, particularly young men, that perhaps she had seen in her friend group, maybe that she had seen when she was dating. She's married now with 2 kids, but perhaps this Oliver, because my take is it's so outlandish and unrealistic what this character accomplishes and does, that I see him more as a metaphor. Not too different from your vampire character that you're seeing. I see Oliver more as a metaphor and some sort of an analog for the postmodern young adult. And it just seems to me that she might be saying with this movie that there was a storm brewing, right? Social media was just starting. I know there's nothing in this movie that says social media. I just think that it's social media, as we know it, had exasperated, I think, the flaws and inadequacies of young student age people. Text messaging started to become popular not too long after this, 2008, 2009, right? At that point, everyone was texting, everyone was online. I almost feel like she's saying this Oliver is, in a sense, the worst possible id monster socially that we could have created in ourselves as a society, as a young society, the youth. This constant connectedness, this constant web of networking and connectivity. This is the character that was released into the world in 2006, say, when he graduated, or by the end of the movie, and he spread his venom everywhere without social networking. This was all face-to-face networking. This was manipulation of the other, face-to-face, with conversation and sliminess and glibness, okay? And that's how he's able to achieve everything he's able to. And it's almost like, imagine this Oliver on social media now, right? What did he do next? What's the next thing he did? So I think that she's kind of saying this is the sort of attitude that has completely vitiated our youth culture and our youth communication sort of sub-society. And I think it's a kind of clever way to put it together before this boom had happened. That's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that, Adam?
I'll do you one better, but first I'll also say this as far as the social media point is concerned.
Sure.
Oliver's big lie about his parents would not have been able to been, gotten away with as long as he had been if social media had existed. Because all you would have to do is just throw his name in a search machine. There's his parents, alive, well, and happy, and we wouldn't have a movie.
Yes, but at the same time, people lie all the time, or at least exaggerate, without even knowing it on social media. Right? They're stitching together a scrapbook of their life that is either wildly exaggerated or just not true. Think of the entire catfishing scandal epidemic.
I mean, fair enough.
He could have had pictures of his parents that didn't exist.
But here's also the kicker. That mother shows me that she would be on, again, like some mothers are, all over his social media with every accomplishment. Like, oh, Ollie, I'm so proud of you. And like, she would have been hovering over him. Maybe he could have formed a different account. Absolutely. But I feel like his mother would have followed him to every single account. So again, characterization, trying to protect that. I'll do you one better as far as the time in which this movie took place towards now, because the movie actually ends modern day. It is a flash forward to 2022. Oliver's last name is Quick. And it implies that through just basic naming technique, that he has to move quickly. Why does he have to move quickly? Because if you believe that, all right, late stage capitalism, money's about to run out, pretty much whoever has money now just has money no matter what. So even in 2006, 2007, 2008, he's kind of going to be stuck in a place that he doesn't want to be in. Crippled by debt because I don't think his family can afford Oxford per se. Working a job that he may be, a little overqualified to do, but damn it, I need the money. So he needs to work quickly to kind of get in, break through that glass ceiling. Now, Fairley, who's arguably his antagonist, what's his last name? Start. He got a head start on everybody else. Though he's arguably kind of, through overly flaunting his wealth and through his kind of laissez-faire attitude, he's going to lose ground to Oliver at some point in time. So I see it as this is the last point in history where I can be a self-made man in the traditional sense. And that's kind of Oliver's vampirism being turned on to the Canton family because, they're unassuming. They seem a lot more pleasant than most wealthy people do, which makes them easy prey. Now, Fairley does see through Oliver, and he does call Oliver out on a lot of his nonsense. And frankly, is my favorite character of the film. But that's why, Oliver doesn't kill Fairley, unlike the rest of the Canton family. He just gets Fairley to be sent away, basically. So I don't know if he sees Fairley as a worthy adversary, or he knows it would kill Fairley even more, knowing, hey, that head start you got in life, I'm going to take that completely away from you, and that's going to kill you more than if I actually kill you. And that's the ultimate revenge of that character. And so that's how I see the setting. Now, it's funny enough, like I hear a lot of people saying, well, cell phones weren't as prevalent in the early aughts as they are now. And maybe that's true, but I think filmmaking needs to catch up and solve that problem as opposed to just making period pieces every single time out. Because I feel like that's just lazy. You can solve it. Park Chan-wook solved it with, what was the film he just put out? Decision to Leave. I think he incorporated cell phones well into the narrative in that film. But I do feel like Fennell did pick this time period because it felt like that last, in between, like just after 9/11 and just before the global recession, where it felt like you have a chance to make it, but you better act quickly. And that's kind of my take on Oliver's character in that sense. I think the character is still vampiric. I still think he's still predatory. He's looking for the right family to kind of leech off of. But maybe that's how he sees it. Like, I'm not going to make it because, I'm kind of in a class system. I got people like this creepy guy at the beginning that's kind of leeching off of me, too. I need to get away from these people. My family's kind of hindering me and holding me back. I need to find the right wealthy family to kind of immerse myself in and kind of eat them from the inside out.
And it's funny you mentioned leeching off of people, or people trying to leech off of him, because at the beginning, of course, there's this friend, right, that he meets who loves maths, and everyone kind of forgets about this character, but I didn't. I love that because, in a sense, I think that character was perhaps the most authentic. Right, of the entire cast of insane characters in this story. That guy, although flawed and quirky, he was real. He was going to be a close confidant of Oliver's, right? He was set up to be the partner in crime. Well, that's probably a bad expression in this case, but he was going to be Oliver's best friend, right? That was probably more suitable for Oliver's, niche,
his station, for lack of a better term.
His station, yes, but he completely he squashed him. He stepped on him to get to Felix and his family, and I think that it's a fascinating dynamic there because he does make his way all the way to the top, but it's extremely unlikely events. It's powerful narcissism and manipulation, and it just seems to me like there's a commentary here about the modern toxic. Even the word toxic has become toxic, but this sort of modern toxic male persona or person that has these heightened dreams of conquering and control and power. And it seems to me she's saying nowadays there are so many ways that one can do that, and this is sort of like a ground zero in a sense for what we see now, which is a lot of that sort of toxicity among not just men but people. And there is so much toxic relations in every kind of way, sexually, spiritually, socially, relations and relationships between characters in this story. And yeah, there's a poison around here somewhere, and you get the sense that Oliver is this giant squid in all of this that's poisoning the well, and we just don't quite see it until we're in the audience watching it.
Let me ask you this. Because of that opening scene and the fact that Oliver is an unreliable narrator, do you buy that he kind of warped, manipulated everything to fall in perfectly into place? Or do you think that's another lie of his where, of course, that kind of person would be like, yes, it was my grand design the entire time. I flattened your bicycle wheel. I actually had money to pay for the drinks at the pub. And I manipulated it to it. Or do you think character's full of shit once again, and he's just telling himself that and manipulating himself into thinking, no, I'm this wonderful genius who concocted all of this to fall perfectly into my place? Because a lot of the people you're describing would talk themselves into thinking that they're a lot smarter and a lot more capable of kind of putting this, weaving this tapestry. As the scene in the bath, the scene with Venetia, the sister, after they bury Felix, and she's talking about their father's nickname for Oliver, which is Spider-Man. There he is in the corner weaving his web. And then Venetia says, I think you're more like a moth. You're drawn to pretty things, and you left your holes in the sweater, basically. And I thought in it upon first viewing was, no, I think that, Sir James is more correct in that assessment. He's this master manipulator. The second viewing, that scene hit me differently where I'm like, no way, I think Venetia might be right. He's, he thinks he's a spider weaving his web. Or is he just a moth that kind of came in and fucked everything up and now he's benefiting off of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think it's a sort of rhetorical question, right? And I'm tempted to say it doesn't matter either way. No, because I think that the end result, right, is the same, and we're still saying the same thing. But I think that just makes the space that Emerald created with this story just more voluminous with the type of thing that she sees and observes in our society right now. She's injected all of that into this story, the space that she's created, this play. And it broadens the entire brushstroke of what she's doing with all of that here. I personally didn't really think about that, and I don't really have a strong opinion either way. But I think it's a really good note that he could just be completely bullshitting even the viewer, right? And it's just a pure matter of luck and happenstance that he ends up where he is. I think it seems to me that the intention might be a little bit, because again, I see Oliver as a sort of collective id monster of sorts, of a certain type of demographic of Western society. So I tend to think that it's intended that he does plan, maybe not every single tiny thing to a T, but he plans the vast majority of this. And it works out because he is just able to pinch these people in the right places, and he's just able to read them like a book and kick them around like rag dolls in such a way. They're vulnerable because they're so vapid. And I got to tell you a story. I went to this was years ago, but I visited the Biltmore Estate. I don't know if everyone's been there. A gigantic estate in Asheville, North Carolina, and it's a Vanderbilt. I think it's the largest Vanderbilt plot, and the most expensive in the country or the world. But I could be mistaken on that. But I visited it. It was used for several movies, like Being There and a whole bunch of others that I can't remember. And this place, when you go there, it does not feel like a home, right? It is so massive and so opulent. It really reminded me almost to a T of this estate, of the Saltburn estate. And when you walk in there, you're seeing things like, oh, here's Napoleon's chessboard. Here is an original portrait of, Henry the whatever. You're walking through this place that never ends. It's a maze. Every room is a different color, like, as you were saying. And here are the quarters for the help staff. And it's just hundreds of rooms. This place is just so otherworldly that you feel it's even bigger than a museum, right? So, and museums don't feel like homes. It's so bizarre that this is someone's living quarters, right? That it's easy to see how the wealth divide not just is a talking point, right? It's not just a political point of discussion. As we sort of, it becomes this sort of dreary over and over, record skipping kind of a thing in politics and that sort of discourse. But it is a palpable contrast that you can feel and you can see and you can touch with the space. You can smell it with all the freshly, perfectly groomed flora that surround everything, the shrubbery. Everything that's gold colored is real gold. I remember my father telling me that. Hey, don't ask me if it's gold. The answer is yes, it is. Right as we were walking in there. And it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. But way far from anywhere I would ever want to live. Call me old-fashioned, but this was it was like the labyrinth, like the hedge maze in that film was the actual building. And I do love how they use the hedge maze as a sort of, external, an external representation of what Saltburn is, in a sense, right? But I just remember thinking about that, Adam. What do you think about, now that we've talked about the title and some scenes, Saltburn, the estate? What the hell is this place? And what does it mean when Farley says, or I'm sorry, it might not be Farley, it was someone who says, you can get lost easily in Saltburn. I think it was the butler who says, many get lost in Saltburn. It's not just you, Oliver. What the hell is this place, and why do people get lost? What does it mean at the end of the day? It's the title of the movie. It's the big, giant, shiny set piece thing. What the hell is Saltburn, really?
At the end of the day, it's just a house. But it's hard to say, really, because there's a world where Oliver does, in fact, get lost in Saltburn. That might be an interpretation that he got lost. But if we're going to believe that, again, this was all part of a grand scheme, he didn't get lost in Saltburn. One could argue Saltburn got lost in him, in a lot of respect. Like this, big old place filled with all these things that have been passed down, obviously, from generation to generation. You get the sense this wasn't just a house that, Sir James and what's Rosamund Pike's character's name? Elspeth.
Yeah.
That they purchased. You get the sense of like this was passed down from grandfather to son to to grandson and so on and so forth. And look, I don't think that you know, Fennell is a classicist. Quite the contrary. I don't think she is remotely, but how there are certain people kind of infiltrating the upper crust that maybe don't know how to be wealthy, for lack of a better term. Because if you look at the Cantons, especially when it comes to most like how people who are affluent are portrayed on screen, they're a lot like the family in Parasite in the sense of they're quirky, they have their eccentricities, but they're not evil. Like even Farrelly, who's
Yeah.
definitely a little shit stirrer, he's not evil.
Yeah. A lot of parallels I saw from this to Parasite.
Parasite and also another movie called The Servant from 1961, which is very British and a lot more like the plot of this film. Just a quick shout out to Servant. Because
Hmm.
also Fennell pointed that out as far as one of the films that influenced Saltburn. So I wanted to give that a quick shout out. But
Hmm.
the family isn't inherently evil, but you can argue Oliver is inherently evil in a lot of respects. And he's kind of creeping in and going up to that, next level. And what does he do once he obtains, Saltburn and all this money and wealth? And this is jumping ahead, obviously, to the last image. He just dances around naked in the castle because he's won, and this is his ultimate triumph, basically. Even though I think there's a deeper meaning to that ties more into your thesis of the film. But as far as like getting lost in Saltburn, as a metaphor, I just think it was some creepy hokey shit for the butler to say to Oliver to kind of psych him out, not knowing that Oliver's here to fuck with his shit, for
Right.
lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So again, it's hard to say because again, I don't think Fennell's a classicist. She's not saying these terrible people are infiltrating the upper crust of society and what will they do, but you look at somebody like Elon Musk who was born wealthy. It wasn't like he
Hmm.
infiltrated. But what does
Right.
he do with his wealth? He buys rocket ships and he builds cars. He tries to do the thing that a little boy would do if they had billions of dollars, let's say. The less I can say about some billionaires and their escapades, the better, because they're rich and they feel like the rules don't apply. But that's and that's always been the thing, wealth and power corrupts ultimately. It's a story as old as the hills. But funny enough, not this family. Yeah, they have eccentricities, and there's a scene between Farley and Felix when it pertains to the footmen and Felix not knowing the names of his footmen and there being racist implications there. But I chalked that more to a detachment and ignorance more than bigotry.
Hmm.
But it's definitely racism. But that's the one part that made me kind of cringe at the family, like, and that was more of a, you guys are just detached. But there's not evil here. But
Right.
there's
I
definitely a
would agree.
detachment.
I would agree. There's not evil, but also I suppose this is connecting in with my thesis. Um, there's the parents. The parents, I believe, in Saltburn, of course. I think that they pretty much are representations of what the children are going to turn into if something doesn't change, right? They are clearly some sort of sexually repressed, right? The mother is it just seems to be like the distillation of ignorance and just being completely disingenuous, like a vulgar shallowness, totally unplugged. She seems to just regurgitate almost sort of the facts and sayings of others to sort of make small talk and conversation.
I have another point with the parents too, and it goes back to my talking about the song "Common People" by Pulp and her
Hmm.
claiming they say they wrote the song about me and they didn't write the song. I'd never been to Greece. There is a kind of affluent person that I call the rich bohemian, where you're going to basically your fashions are going to be a lot more like thrift store, but expensive thrift store. You're going
Hmm.
to live your life kind of in a way that you've heard about in a Lou Reed album, but you've never actually experienced that. but you
Hmm.
act and you pretend like you do. There's, to your point, of vapidness about that, where you're incredibly wealthy, yet you're talking about, oh, but I'm wealthy, but like I know what it's like to be salt of the earth. Even though it's like I can tell this woman had never, you know, never really left this house, to be honest with you. Had never left the station, never kind of built herself up. She was already kind
Hmm.
of in the upper crust, even far back when she apparently was hanging out with all the Britpop bands.
Right.
Sir James, it's funny because it feels like Elspeth was a second wife or a third wife almost. Because
Hmm.
it feels like there is definitely an age gap between the two. And he seems even more out where the trains don't run than she is. Because he's talking about
Right.
like wanting to do a fancy dress where he can just walk around in a suit of armor at a party.
Right.
And the way he talks when his son dies, and that creepy speech that Richard E. Grant gives, where he's trying to wake his son up knowing that he's dead, like
Right.
almost like he's going to will his son back to life to some degree or another.
Hmm.
It's it's funny because they're vapid, they're disconnected, but they don't know how else to be. Like you get this. There's a quote from Citizen Kane, to go back to that for a second, that after Kane's, going through bankruptcy and kind of foreclosed, everything's getting foreclosed on. He's trying to sell off as much of his things as he can to kind of stay afloat. He has a line, if I hadn't been so rich, maybe I could have been a really good guy. And I feel like if these people hadn't been as affluent as they are, maybe they would have had a chance. Maybe.
Right.
I think
Right.
Felix absolutely would have had a chance if he wouldn't been as affluent, because he feels like a very welcoming person. He feels like he wants to give everybody
Yes.
the benefit of the doubt. But again, it's that affluence and that disconnect that allows somebody like Oliver to kind of come in.
Yeah. And that to me is that's the really interesting dichotomy that I think that Fennell has drawn up here for us, right? It's almost like what is worse, right? Being that psychopathic, murderous, demented lunatic that Oliver is, or just the fact that, like you said, these people don't even know any better. Their isolation has turned them into complete, bantering imbeciles, right? If anything, emotional imbeciles that cannot connect with the outside world. When they keep coming, when they take these people in, like Pamela, for example, right? It's almost like they're so tired of life that they have to do some sort of what feels like philanthropy, right? Or some sort of good will toward
Charity.
other charity, right? Toward these other people in order to zap something back into their hearts to get it to beat again, right? And I do think that what you said about the children is true. What you said about Felix, I think there's definitely hope, right? It feels like there's hope for the kids.
There is.
They're not jaded yet, like you said, right? There's still like some impulse. There's a charisma. There's a sexual charisma. There's a social charisma. Maybe more so with Felix, but the point is, I root for these kids. His sister, Felix's sister, actually cries very hard for him, right? She it sort of breaks the spell in a sense. She knows what Oliver is at that point, maybe the whole time, but she's enjoyed it. I don't know, who knows, but
I
at that
think
point she knows who he is. She cries. The parents can't even cry. It's pathetic. Is that worse than being this sort of sociopathic monster? I don't know.
it's funny because Fairley and Venetia both kind of ping Oliver, fairly more so, and Venetia kind of towards the end she gets him a bit more.
Right.
But with the kids, and to your point about the kids, at the very worst, they're going to end up like the parents in the sense of they're going to be aloof and disconnected, but benign ultimately. Yeah, sure, we can argue about, how much is too much, and, wealth inequality and all that fun shit. But it's also like this new brand of billionaire, and I think about this a lot. And going back to guys like, Elon Musk, guys like, why am I blanking on his name right now? Guy Jeff Bezos,
Mm-hmm.
who literally
Founder
models
founder of Amazon.
who literally models himself after Lex Luthor to some degree or another. Like, if you think about it, and I'm not advocating for either because I think both are wrong, you either have the benign wealthy who are going to sit in their ivory towers and occasionally come down, or you have billionaires who want to be fucking Bond villains who just want to conquer the
Yeah.
world. It feels, and it feels like Oliver's definitely cut from that cloth. Where now that
Yeah.
he's amassed this wealth and gotten Saltburn and essentially won at the end, what's going to be his path? Because it's not going to be benign. He's not going to lock himself in and like, I won. And I'm not
Yeah.
projecting what the future would be, but it's fun to often guess where these characters are going to be,
Right.
later on. But like, he's not going to be the kind of billionaire or, incredibly wealthy person that's going to just, sit on the sidelines and throw himself weird parties. In his
Right.
mind, he might think, I'm doing the right thing. But he's already a liar and a sociopath. How can you trust that?
Right.
And was there something gained at the end of this film? Certainly for Oliver, yes. But was there something lost, in the grand scheme of everything, and kind of this new crop of billionaire, the kind of Bond villain billionaire that's now kind of, emerged in the past, 10 years or so?
Right. It's very fascinating what all the dynamics here. And another thing that I was actually thinking about was just talking about how Saltburn or this life of affluence has affected these people. I also got the sense that there was a lot of sexual frustration, or to quote Elspeth, I don't know if you caught this. She says of her daughter, she's sexually incontinent. And she also says things like, "We're all cold blooded,"
Mm.
right? I mean, there's clearly a problem with these people that can't even enjoy the pleasures of intimacy, right? And I think that Fennel is really hammering that here, and I do think that's also another justification for what we see that really grosses us out, in terms of the sex in the movie, which is really the only thing that is gross. If you think about it, the stuff that's gross and icky is the sex stuff, right? Unless you just cold blooded murder, right? But that hits in a different way, right?
In a
So
funny way, because to your point, the
yeah,
only sex scene that is maybe not is when Oliver goes to pay Fairley a visit to kind of like, are you going to behave?
yeah,
That scene.
yeah. But
And
even yeah, but even
and
that is just wrought with discomfort.
oh yeah.
We're still trying to figure out who the hell Oliver is or what he is. Um, at this point, just to use your metaphor, he's like a bat flying around in the night, right? From visiting room to room through the window or something. But even that is that confrontation was very interesting because it's like you said, everyone here is cold blooded. At one point, I think even I think Oliver even says, "I'm a vampire," right, during that sex scene with Venetia.
Yeah.
So, so, but what's happening here is that there's a sexual frustration that has completely invaded the the lives of these people, minus Felix. And I think that Felix is that ray of hope to be the more normal one, and yet he is the one that's attacked first, in a sense, by termite Oliver.
Like, let me ask you this, because obviously Oliver, cause I really can't even call him a repressed character because he does act on his sexual impulses on both levels because he has sex with both Venetia and with Fairley. But the ultimate prize is Felix. Is it an example
Exactly.
of, let's say, hypothetically speaking, if Felix did, because it's obvious Oliver loves Felix in that way.
Hmm.
And let's say Felix loved Oliver back in that same way too. Which maybe they did, maybe they didn't, because I feel like the lie being revealed about Oliver's parents kind of ruined whatever romantic relationship they may or may not have had. Because
Hmm.
at that point, of course, Felix was going to cut Oliver out of his life, and rightfully so.
Right.
But do you think that if those two had hooked up at some point in time, that maybe the result would have been, different because Oliver, in essence, while not obtaining the ultimate, getting Saltburn, he would have definitely been part of the family then, because you feel like the parents would have been a little bit more open to it. They seem a little bit more open to it because Fairley is given multiple opportunities and seems to be, his homosexuality is treated openly by the family.
Right.
At the end of the day, if let's say Oliver and Felix do end up together, and Oliver still gets what he wants, plus he gets the added bonus of Felix. But once Felix kind of spurns him, his attitude, instead of being with Felix, he wants to now become Felix to a lot of respects. In a lot of respects.
Yes.
To
Which
the
is
point
some
where
sort. Yeah.
literally he's wearing in the bathtub scene where Venetia, the "You're a moth drawn to pretty things" that whole speech, when Oliver kisses, Venetia, she notices he's wearing Felix's aftershave.
Right.
He's already becoming Felix in a lot of respects.
Yes. And that's very interesting territory that you're getting into there, because I also felt from this story that I think that Felix, you can read that Felix is actually just kind of push back on what you said about how he obviously loves him in that way. I think that maybe you could read this as Felix is almost like the personification of power and wealth and handsomeness and all that stuff wrapped into one in and of itself. That is the pursuit that Oliver is looking for here. That's the thing. And I think that Fennell could be saying something about how sociopathy is one of the sort of like landmark parts of being a sociopath is not being able to feel pleasure, right? And what I feel in this story is that Oliver is constantly confusing pleasure with pain, and he's not. It doesn't seem to me that he's able to distinguish the two, or at least not nearly enough in order to make himself satisfied with anything, except for perhaps the end of the film, which we'll talk about in a second. But to me, it's not so clear that Oliver really does love Felix that way, because I don't even think that Oliver knows what love is. He's just trying to do what he thinks other people want him to do in order to appease them for his own gain. However, what he does feel a pull, a gravity toward, is not. I don't necessarily think it's love, which is why I think he's trying to love. He's trying to do the things that people do, like handling someone else's body, trying to get instincts about bodily fluids, trying to achieve penetration, trying to achieve a sexual release of some, but he fails to do it. I think that's one of the reasons why he's crying like a baby in the rain, naked on Felix's grave, because it's not so clear to me that he even can release. It's not so clear to me that he even knows what that is or how it feels. He just sees it as it's a dollar sign or he sees zeros and ones, maybe. He sees a value to this as opposed to feeling the thing itself. And I think that could be why he says so many times in the film, the opening and the closing, "Oh, did I love him? Oh, yes, I did. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. I actually hated him. But did I love him this way?" He's
like he's trying to talk himself. He just
doesn't know.
It.
Exactly. And I think that this is a very cleverly written metaphor character, because this is a morality tale of sorts. He's all alone. He seems to be happy at the end of the film, but he's all alone. He doesn't know. He lost someone that he thinks that he loves, who you get a sense he could be, he can't love anyone else, or he'll just love the very next person that he sees that seems to encompass the same, dominant, rich, charming male that he wishes that he could be, but he never will. And that Saltburn is a sort of, that Saltburn is a sort of substitute for those things.
And also
but we get the sense that since he's all alone, he's now, Rapunzel.
I mean, but like going back to that final image of the film, you can
Yeah.
argue, yeah, sure, he didn't get Felix, but he became Felix by the end because the way that Fennell shoots Barry Keoghan, did I say that right? Keoghan, yes,
Kyogen, yeah.
Barry Keoghan. That's probably the hottest the movie stars looked in quite some time. He's chiseled. He looks
Yeah.
incredible. The hair is kind of just right now. And all the things that he wasn't, and maybe he saw Felix as, he now is. He has essentially become Felix by the end of the film. And he
Right.
celebrates by, being completely himself, finally free, literally stripped naked in front of the world and dancing because he's finally found maybe not who he is because he's a sociopath. Who is he really? His personality is incredibly malleable in that sense, but he's become who he wants to be by the end of the
Right.
film.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And now let's go right into the closing because we've been waiting for this. Oh man, it's so fun. So obviously, Oliver kills Elspeth in her bed. Unlike you, I actually know how to work. Oh, cruel. And then that leads, and then it's a montage reveal of Oliver's master plan, right? And I did the bike tire and I did all this stuff and everything was planned. And then he goes on again about Felix. I loved him, but sometimes I hated him. And then he talks about how I hated all of them. We're talking about jealousy and malevolence here, and all that stuff is, like I said, it seems to be obfuscating love for him, and I think that underscores it too, right? And I love this line about spoiled dogs sleep belly up, bitch. Right as he sticks the dagger in her, he doesn't actually, he unplugs her,
Yeah.
but which goes along. He's sucking stuff out. He unplugs her.
Yeah.
I love that imagery. That's such an uncomfortable image, right? With that sound where he pulls the thing out of her throat, and it's so
She's just
disgusting.
gargling and just, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Just gross. And he says, I hated all of you. He kills her. He confesses. And then I think he says something like, he didn't say it, but there's this implication about like about how playing with fire is dangerous no matter how rich you are, and but he ends up on top.
Yeah.
And because he ends up on top, we hear the song Murder on the Dance Floor while he dances completely nude, doing his twirlies and his skips and his plies all around because he has won. And then, of course, it ends with him, playing them all like puppets. The little puppet box at the very end.
With the rocks that they threw into the river with all their names on it, they apparently just dug out and put on top of the boxes.
Yes, exactly. Like little pieces in a game, that you acquire. And just, again, more things that kind of tell me that this is more of a metaphorical piece. But yeah, what did you think of this ending, Adam? Actually, to be specific here, you had told me that when you watched this ending, you couldn't stop thinking about it for a week or so.
For a week,
right?
Yeah.
For a week. Tell us about that. Why?
Do you want the metaphor or do you want the literal?
Let's do both quickly so we can wrap her up.
The metaphor, as I kind of jumped into it, it ties the entire film together. He is now his platonic ideal. He is now essentially Felix. He now looks the part. He can now physically be the part. Again, I've not seen a male star look that good in a very long time. And that leads me to the literal, which is how many years were women objectified on camera? How many years? Pretty much since the dawn of cinema. Recently, that's kind of been getting, because I don't know whether it's more female voices or whether it's just a change in taste. That's starting to get flipped where men are starting to get a lot more objectified than women. And objectified could be a sleazier term, but there he is, the male form as perfect as it can possibly be, dingle dangle and everything, which how many, it used to be such a shock to the system where we saw, a penis on screen. Always such a, oh my God, did I see that? And now it's a bit more commonplace. But every time I do see one, I'm like, I like that counterbalance is kind of shifted to where both men and women can be objectified in the same way, if anything,
Right. And
on film,
vulnerable.
and vulnerable, and not even vulnerable in this case, triumphant, because he's literally again stripped down, naked. This is his true self now. He
Right.
doesn't have to. To your point about life being a play, he doesn't have to act anymore. The facade is completely gone. I don't have to be. I can take that old persona, crumple up, throw it
Right.
in the garbage. This is now me.
True. We're seeing Oliver for the first time and only time in his true original form, right?
If that's his true form,
If
or if that's his
if that's
idealized
even
form.
exactly, exactly, or it's a bit of a throw. I actually had read this little piece of trivia where I think that piece in the middle of the maze, that demon sculpture thing, was constructed for the film, of course, in the likeness of Barry Keoghan. And as if you remember, it was completely nude and had these big horns, and it was clearly evil. And this is, of course, where um, Felix dies. Felix, he kills Felix. So this to me was also a little bit of a throwback to that scene where he really is in his, if this is his original kind of primal form, he really is just this sort of social demon, and even more than just a social demon because he ends up murdering everyone. But it to me is about how demonic things build, right? It's about how this character has accrued his credibility, his power, his influence, and in just such a way, it almost mirrors. Speaking of that movie being there, it almost mirrors being there in this kind of a way, where that character's more innocent, where it's this imbecile, literally an idiot that just gets misinterpreted every which way and becomes rich and wealthy and becomes the nominee for the president of the United States, just by constant misunderstandings. But this character is sort of like Chauncey Gardner's evil opposite, where he is doing everything that he possibly can, playing stupid, playing dead, doing all these different things to get to that almost same place by the end of the film, where he's floating, he's in air, he's ascended to the heavens in a way, and he's sort of the opposite of this Greek god for the good. He's a demon that will just chew through anything in his way, and you almost think that you're looking at this like Greek god statue, like you were saying, in this chiseled, perfected form, but he's real. He's dancing around and he's abusing his power, and I thought that was very cool too.
Let me ask you this: how do
Sure.
you think Emerald Fennell feels about Oliver as a character? Because that's a very triumphant ending
Yes, it
for a
is.
character that is, as we kind of pointed out, and is again, he's likably dislikable. That's a phrase I like using because
Yeah,
I was enthralled with the character from start to finish. I
yeah,
enjoyed the performance a lot, but he is a horrible human being. And he
yes.
does ultimately get everything he wants, and then someone could argue by the end of the film. So, how do
Right.
you think the director feels about the character?
Oh man, who knows? I think the most important question is about how the viewer feels about the character.
Of course.
Um, not just in general as a rule of thumb, but especially in this case, because this is a very reactive movie for the viewer, in my opinion. Right? It's very much about Fennel constructing moments that cause us to squirm or react or think in some kind of a way, about themselves and about the people that are in their life, the parasites in their own life, and people that manipulate them. If I were to guess, which I don't know, why not? Uh, I think that this is probably a person that the director is fiercely afraid of. She hates, I think, people like this. Um, she's afraid of people becoming more like this. And I think that this is the demon in the flesh for her because, again, back to that quote, she wants to live in America and she wants to make stories about murder. I think that, America is such an interesting place. It's such a melting pot of different people. It definitely contrasts Saltburn a lot, but I do think that there could be a lot in Saltburn and in this character that she had personally been bothered by, whether it's the environment she was brought up with, the politics of it, the country, whatever it is, right? She wants to get away from that. And I think that she's seen, probably from a very young age, I get the sense that, and I probably will even more so when I see Promising Young Woman, that Fennell understood that people are evil, right? And they can make decisions that are demonic and that adversely affect other people constantly. What is more of a fascinating question to a child than why do people murder, right? I mean, it's so foundational to shatter your what you know of the world, kind of like we talked about with Smile, with questions like this that inevitably come up in our lives, like why do people murder? And I think she was constantly fascinated with that. And I get the sense that she's giving us a little bit of a look under the hood into what she believes are the details that surround, whether how figurative or literal they are, the details of what life is like for us that can provide a space for horrible misbehavior, horrible ethics, horrible morals. And this is a study of that from her perspective. So we're going to wind down. I really, really appreciate your time, Adam, and I do want you to have the last word, at least in the meat and potatoes of our discussion here. I just want to ask you real fast, why did you enjoy the film? Because I hear from a lot of people that I kind of liked it. I don't really know what I thought about it. Why, if I liked it or not, even I was just so off put. In just a quick nutshell, why do you like this movie?
I enjoyed being able to peel back the onion, especially in the first viewing of where the story was going. I also, and this is going to be a very new Hollywood kind of answer, I like movies about fucked up people by and large. And look, I'm more of the time I'm sympathetic towards fucked up people than otherwise. I'm not sympathetic towards Oliver in the slightest. Frankly, I think Farrelly might be my favorite character, and he's the just because I love how genuine the character is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I enjoyed, again, peeling back the onion. I enjoyed watching a movie that there really aren't many likable characters in. And I
Right.
think that we kind of overuse that a lot, where a character doesn't have to necessarily be likable, they have to be interesting. You have to be compelled by them.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, I was not bored for a second watching this film. Like at all. I was engrossed watching
Me too.
these
Yeah.
terrible people, by and large, just being terrible to each other, for like a better term. The reason why I asked that question, why do you think Emerald feels the way she feels about those characters? I've written characters that are complete monsters. On top of that,
Right.
I wrote a movie called The Killer Across the Street a few years ago that I've made and has since done the festival thing, in which there's a twist that shows these seemingly goofy, eccentric people being absolute terrible monsters. And I had to thread that needle, but again, that twist made them more compelling than if they were just a couple kooky, weird people from the suburbs. And
Right.
I think that this movie, it would have been easy for Oliver to just be the kind of doughy eyed innocent, succumb to this affluence this entire time. That would have been the easier story to tell. But to have
Yeah.
him just be a shit from the beginning to the end, to have arguably the most likable character still be a very good looking, very detached rich boy is intriguing to me. The fact that
Yeah.
the movie ends essentially with the villain winning was intriguing to me the entire time, and that's why I enjoyed the film as much as I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear
That
you.
that and it was transgressive to your point without being exploitative, which is a hard needle to thread. And trust me, I love, exploitation films as much as the next degenerate, but it's always nice when it has a little bit extra meaning behind it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree completely. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Speaking Cinema with Andrew Schwartz. And I really want to thank our amazing guest. I mean, this guy can deconstruct anything, right? I mean, you heard everything. So thank you so much,
Jesus,
Adam,
man.
for coming on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Anytime, man. I'm already looking forward to the next one where we can talk about a film that maybe isn't as new. Maybe something that you and
Right.
I have a shared love of that we can deconstruct and talk up even more.
Yeah.
And
Who knows?
who
We're going to
knows?
do all different kinds of stuff on this podcast. But thank you so much to the listeners for supporting. Again, please like and comment and leave a review for the podcast. It really, really helps. And I appreciate everyone, especially Emerald Fennell. Thank you for giving us this very interesting film. My question for all of the viewers for this episode is, does Saltburn remind you of a real place you have been to? Why do you think this place comes to mind? You can see Adam's newest short film, Don't Eat Dead Fish, playing on Sunday, March 24th at Horror Hound in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he'll also be doing a panel on Saturday, March 23rd at 11 a.m. The panel is called The Spark of Madness. You can also find Adam's work on his YouTube channel. The handle is MRADMAN20, as in Mr. Adman 20. I'd like to thank Adam again for joining us, and I would like to thank you, the listeners, for making this podcast possible. I'll see you on the next episode.